Welcome back, everyone, to R2Kast number 61. Last week we were in Oxfordshire, I believe, with Carl, the pretend farmer, talking about the troubles of high temperatures and droughts in England. And we're going to get into that a wee bit more with today's guest, slightly out with, well, not slightly, completely out with England, but we'll get into that in a minute. Next week, we'll be travelling home to my home island. I've never done a podcast with someone on Arran, and I thought, where better to start than number 62, the year my dad was born, which means he's 60 in September. When this is going out, he'll already be 60. We're going back to Arran to interview my old man, so that'll be quite fun. Don't know if I'm going to have to call him Colin or Dad or what. We'll see. That is next week's fun to find out. But today, number 61, we're travelling to France to have a chat, which I'm really excited about. We've got someone who's followed the page for some time and has got a lot of interesting stuff on their own accounts on social media, which we'll get into as we go along. It is Lorraine Turnbull. Lorraine, would you like to say hello?
Oh, thanks for having me. It's lovely to hear another Scottish voice.
Before we get on into another excellent episode of the R2Kast, I would just like to thank the sponsor for the show today, The Scottish Farmer. A weekly magazine highlighting everything you need to know regarding the Scottish agricultural industry, whether it's breaking news, events happening in the sector, market reports, classified ads, or just wholesome stories happening in the industry. The Scottish Farmer's got it for you.
Even though, when you just talked about your dad, I suddenly realised I'm exactly the same age as your dad. I am old enough to be your mother, Wallace.
In fairness, being old enough to be my mother legally would mean 41, because we were talking about it in the office last week. One of the boys is 41. And he was like, "Oh, I'm quite young." And I'm like, "You're legally old enough to be my old man." 42, sorry, 42. But there you are. If your birthday is near my dad's birthday, happy birthday when it comes. I hope you have a good one. Lorraine, could you tell us a bit about yourself? Actually, do you know what? Before we ask you that, I just want to say, first off, we've had some lovely backgrounds. We've had, well, you guys haven't seen this, but number 64 is a gorgeous background. I just filmed that last week. I won't ruin it. We've had Will Rubottom with a lovely kitchen in the background. Richard Cornick was saying there's quite a few that stand out, but yours is very nice. We've got a lot of degrees in the background, as we were talking about earlier. Very nice room by the looks of things, but we're not here to talk about interior design, because I could not get 45 minutes, that's for sure. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, Lorraine? Where are you from originally? Because you've been about, shall we say, so tell us where you're from, and the accent, as you've already given away, will help somewhat, I'm sure, on that one.
Okay, well, I'm originally born in Glasgow, and I was brought up in Glasgow and left there to go to work in Edinburgh and to study in Edinburgh. So I was 23, sort of a mature-ish student. Not when you hear the rest of my life, but it was mature enough at 23. So I went and lived in Edinburgh, had a wonderful couple of years there, got pneumonia twice because it's so cold. And then from Edinburgh, went back to Glasgow, worked at Glasgow University Library, and joined the police. Weren't expecting that, were you?
I've got a feeling today is going to be one of those interviews where I'm not going to expect quite a lot. I've got a feeling
it was great. I mean, the great thing about the police, you get paid really, really well. Every day is different. And I was quite lucky because I was put on a rural poaching patrol on my own in a car on night shift. So I had a couple of years doing that, got married, had kids, had a divorce, remarried, took my husband and my children to Cornwall. So from Glasgow to Cornwall, the biggest move in the world for some people. And we lived on a small holding for 13 years, during which time I got my teaching degree and was teaching at Duchy College, and then was successful in applying for and getting a job as a coordinator for the Rural Business School. The best job in the world. I had a ball. I met so many interesting people and I had a great time. And then we had the vote for Brexit, the college, well, the Rural Business School lost the EU funding, and my kids went off to uni, and John and I sat and thought, where are we going with this? What's next? What's the next big adventure? And we thought, I know, we'll move to France. So we moved to France in 2017, and we moved to a really, really swanky, luxury, ginormous house with a huge pool. And within 4 months, I was having the conversation with my son, and he was like, "What's the matter?" And I went, "I miss the sheep. I really miss the sheep." So we had COVID, and during COVID, we made the decision that, luxury life wasn't for us. And we bought a small rundown fermette about 40 minutes east of where we were. And we now have a lovely little farm of 5.5 acres. And I have my lovely sheep who are so friendly, they would sit in your knee and beg. And we couldn't be happier. It was the right move for us.
I don't think there's many folk out there sitting in mansions thinking, do you know what this needs? Sheep.
I love sheep. I love sheep. When we were in Cornwall, we had a 1 acre smallholding. And as anyone will tell you, oh my God, you're playing at it. It's a hobby farm. You can't make money on it. Well, I made money on it. I made considerable money on it. Now, on my 1 acre, the whole idea was to work seasonally and to get things to work with each other. So we planted an apple orchard, and one of the courses that I was putting together for the Rural Business School was a come and learn how to make cider. And I enjoyed that so much that I went on a week-long course, as you do, turn around to your husband on a Friday night and say, "You've got the kids for a week. See ya." And off I went, and I never looked back. And it was really profitable. It was great fun. We had the chickens in the orchard. We had lambs in the orchard. We made enough money to be able to give us both a wage. And it was terrific. And it was just one of those things. I think everything fell into place at the right time. And you do take risks with things, but that's part of what life's about. And it was great. And we did that for nigh on 10 years. And then Kate went off to uni first, and then Kieran went off to uni. And we got to that stage. It was, do we get bigger and go quite commercial? I mean, at that stage, we were making 4,000 litres of cider a year.
Wow.
And then, wow. The money was rolling in. But you have to make that decision and say, do we jump bigger? And I said no, because the fun will go out of it, and that's not what we were about.
Well, we'll jump back into Cornwall, Lorraine. You've covered everything. I mean, I think I've got enough to talk here for some time. But we'll jump back. I quite like to go sort of chronologically. It just helps my brain. I don't understand things if we don't do it that way. See, when you went to study, what did you study?
Well, originally at school.
Originally, let's go right back, back to Edinburgh.
Fucking hell! Right, O grades.
English. Oh no! I mean when you went to what I assume you meant is you went to uni then, or is that wrong? At 23.
Right. So
yeah.
I have to go back even further than that.
Okay.
And this is quite contentious. I wrote about this in one of my books, and my brother wouldn't talk to me because of what I wrote. When I was 17, my mother wanted me to do a hotel receptionist course.
Okay.
Right? Now, after what I've just told you, I think you can imagine that probably isn't what I wanted to do.
I can believe that, yeah.
Now, I used to get Farmers Weekly every week with my pocket money from the age of 10.
Okay.
And when I was 17, I applied to do an HND at Robert Gordon's Institute, which is no longer. You're too young to remember this, but it was the bee's knees. If you wanted to be anything and do it educationally in agriculture, you went to Robert Gordon's.
So this isn't related to Robert Gordon Uni, no? Is there no relationship there?
No.
No, right.
So, yeah, Robert Gordon's Uni.
Aye, so it's related to that. It's
yes.
The same place.
So I applied for that, and my dad insisted on coming up on the train with me to go and have the interview, because he was convinced that there was no way they were going to give a place to someone who did not come from an agricultural background.
Yep.
And I walked it. They offered me the place on the spot. My dad was livid. You're not going to come and room in an oil town. Do you honestly think we're letting you do that? So the poor man who interviewed me was really embarrassed. I was distraught. And all the way back on the train journey, I cried my eyes out. And basically, I just had to wait until I was old enough to leave home. And I'd applied for a course as a library assistant because I literally had to get out. And I thought, I'll get a couple of years, I'll make a wee bit of money, and then I'll go back and revisit the agriculture thing. It's always for me been agriculture, always.
Yeah.
So I went to live in Edinburgh, did this course, loved it, went to work in the National Museum of Scotland Library as a curator. Did that for 2 years and then moved back to Glasgow and worked in the Glasgow University Library, which was great. So I'm banking the money, buying a wee flat, doing it up, flogging it 2 years later for a vast amount of money, buying a better house, doing it up, flogging it off. And eventually at the age of, 43, managed to buy cash my small holding in Cornwall.
That's bloody good going. Now, given the age you said you were, I'm not going to talk about ages, but that's 17 years ago. I assume it's not as easy. Well, I don't assume it's not as easy to do that now, but that is still bloody good going. That's impressive. Just flogging, working up to that.
The things are, if you want a dream and you really want to make something come true, you've got to sit logically and you have to have a plan. You've got to give yourself a really good, serious talking to so that you keep your feet on the ground and you know where you're going. Now, I worked 2 jobs and we never had holidays. We never ate out and did all that, and it was like, I remember my children, why can't we go to Disneyland like any normal family? Because we're not a normal family. We're not going to Disneyland. And we did all that. But the 2 jobs really helped me. Before I left Glasgow, we were living in a 3-bed semi, and I was working night shift stacking shelves in Sainsbury's. Right. And during the day, I had another job at a college working as a clerical assistant, and I was finishing my Open University degree, and you're managing to squeeze in, going to bed and having a few hours sleep and getting the kids up in the morning to go to school. So I'm not rich. I've just worked really hard for it. And it is hard, but I was determined, if I can't go and do what I wanted to do at uni, I'll buy my own place. And then it was, how can I possibly afford to buy a small holding? And the small holding we bought was an agricultural tie, which is another leap of faith. Now, they don't have many of these in Scotland, but there's a lot of them in England. And what happens is, the person who's buying a property that is under the constraints of an agricultural tie has to be able to fulfil the terms of the tie. Now, there is a general wording. Some of them are more precise that tie you down to a geographical area, but ours was, must be employed in agriculture, forestry or horticulture or last employed, so you've retired. Now, I set up my own business to do that. So I went self-employed and we ran a plant nursery and we made a loss for 3 years. And I remember having the conversations with the tax office who were saying, why are you doing this? And I said, because we live in an ag tie and technically the council can make us sell it because if I go and get a normal job, they're saying I'm breaking the terms of the tie. So we did that and that was really stressful. Really stressful. For 11 years we did that. So and that's how we could afford it.
Well, yeah. So with that tie, there's obviously problems there, but it sounds like you managed to work around it, even if, every business starts at a loss. Not every business, but you're not going to be making millions the second you kick off. So that's to be expected in itself. Yeah. I've got one question before we sort of get into the small holding side, Lorraine. Could you tell us a bit about the police? That sounds like quite an interesting role you had in the police.
Okay, right. For Scottish listeners of a certain age, Strathclyde Police, as it was when I was in it, was broken up into areas which have now all amalgamated into Police Scotland. I've got a friend who's just retired. We joined the same day, and she was like, "Oh, it's not like that anymore. It's all changed." But I was in K Division. Hate to say that. And K Division was notorious for being one of the, well, probably the most dangerous division in the whole of Scotland.
Right.
Never a dull moment. So I was one of the oldest ones when we joined, did our initial training, and on my first day out in the street after my 8 weeks training, I was at a murder. First day out in the street, on the telly, the lot, my mum phoning me when I came in, "I've been trying to get you for hours, you were on the TV."
First day.
First day. Oh. And it just went on from then. It was never a dull moment.
I mean, it's hard to get worse than that. Better. I don't know what you want as the police. Does that mean it's exciting? I don't feel like that's correct. Yeah, quite a role.
Exciting. It was exciting. You could have days where your day, if you were starting on an early shift, that you were going and you were doing school crossing patrols. Then you'd be called to a house and the neighbours were worried because the elderly person next door hadn't opened their curtains. You had to deal with all that. And then you would be on night shift, sitting outside nightclubs, waiting for the fights to start, and start they did. And then, you know, drunk drivers, domestic disputes, road accidents, you name it, I was at it.
It's quite a varied job then.
Very varied. Builds up your communication skills and your ability to deal with people at all ends of the social spectrum.
That's put so diplomatically. That sounds like someone who's moved up in the police. Is what that sounds like, Lorraine. An answer for everything with that one. The move you've now, right? So a few changes in life, whatever. You've now moved down to Cornwall, and you've got this small holding. If you've told us a little bit about already, you mentioned the apples. Was it just apples you had there, or what else was there?
The whole thing with what we wanted to do was we wanted to be as sustainable as we could be to produce. And this, I think this is every smallholder's dream. They want to produce their own food. They want to know where it's coming from. You want to know what your animals are eating. You want to make sure they have a good life and a good death, because let's face it, when you've got animals, there is death always. And for us on 1.2 acres, that was really hard. So we had to really think, right, so we started with chickens, because everybody starts with chickens. And then we had the apple trees, and they were protected with tree guards and things like that. And then I started doing relief lambing for a big farm about 30 miles away. And they had a flock of 600 cross mules. And there was two brothers who were tenants of the farm. There was about 10 years between them. And the younger brother and the older brother didn't go on because they both had different ideas about the way the farm. So I was the buffer in the middle. So I'd get it all from the younger one. You've got to tell him this, and there are doubles in there, and that one's no fed, and that'll be dead in the morning. And I had to communicate politely and nicely to the other brother who was taking over. And I was there on my own. So you've got 3 different sheds, and anyone who knows sheep, you've got, you know, they're all scanned. So this pen's doubles, this pen's singles, and you're trying to mother up a triple with a single and all the rest of it. And I was doing all that on my own. It was great. I absolutely loved it. And it was such an education. So we had that, and we had the cider, and my husband opened a garden machinery maintenance business so that he was around, and the reason why he did that was my mother developed dementia, and she couldn't live in Glasgow on her own, and my brother said, well, you're not having her. And I said, okay. And he said, you've got a big house, you've got an annex, you can put her in the annex. So that was interesting because we had to kind of work around somebody always being there. And at the start, it was okay, but it deteriorated within 6 months, and it ended up, she set fire to her kitchen one night when we were all sleeping in bed, and we had to go and get her put into social care at that point. So it was
It's a horrible disease.
It is a horrible disease. It's a disease where, unfortunately, you're grieving twice. You're grieving when the person has lost their mind because they don't know who you are and they've forgotten everything. And then when they finally die, you're grieving again. And it is tiring and horrible.
I think the proof of how bad it is when someone with dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, whatever, actually does die. It's almost nice isn't the word, but really relief. Yeah. You realise just how taxing that must have been on them to not really know who they were, and how taxing, like yourself in that situation, you're there, and it's not nice. But yeah, that would have caused its challenges as well. From, seems weird to say it, but from the business perspective, because you'd be focusing on your mum, of course you would be. So you've got your relief lambing, you've got the cider on the go. Your husband's carrying out maintenance on various garden equipment around the area. You mentioned you were producing 4,000 litres of cider, right? Yeah. I'm going to give you a question here, and you're going to think it's a silly question, but I'm good at them, so it's fine. How many apples is required for? Can I have a guess how many apples is required for that?
Well, it depends on the tree. It depends on so many things. So if you've got 20 trees in your orchard, but they're all different varieties, every tree is going to produce differently. Now, some trees that produce every year about the same amount of apples, but some are biennial. So one year you'll get a good crop, the next year you'll hardly get anything. Now, you chuck into that mix climatic conditions. Now, I've got apple trees here, and I'm like, yes, 15 trees, we're making cider. Are we hell making cider? Because we've had a drought now for 8 weeks. The last rain we had rain for about 20 minutes 3 nights ago, and the last rain before that was 8 weeks ago.
Jesus. And just for reference, when you mentioned that, Lorraine, you told me at the minute what temperature you're with, and could you tell the viewers what temperature, one, you're feeling at the minute, which I can't be aware, and two, you were
upstairs, right? I'm upstairs, I've got the window open, I've got a fan on, and I've got a temperature thing here that is now saying it's 39, and that's 7 o'clock in the evening, right? Now, outside, it's probably about 28 at the moment, but last week we had a whole week of between 40 and 42.
I would be a crisp. I'm just not cut out for that stuff. Oh God, no! It's just, that's not enjoyable. I think Carl that we had on last week was talking. What did he say? I think they were maxing out about. No, they were sitting at 34 when we were recording. Yeah. And I think, well, what are we at the minute? Right now it's 6 o'clock, and it's a pretty warm day today. We're 19, and that's just on the height of that, and that's almost double. It's more than double.
It's half time. It's half time. Yeah.
If it wasn't for the job I had, it would be, I'd be losing my job if I was doing that. But it's crazy, and with that worse, like you're saying, the lack of water. Are you having to irrigate, or what do you do there?
Now, we're on a very small farm, and we don't really have crops. I've got a vegetable patch which I have been watering from IBC containers because everybody here conserves water. So we've got 2 IBCs, so that's 2,000 litres, and we have an underground citern, so it's an underground cistern,
right,
that collects water from the roofs, and that's 10,000 litres. That's dry now.
Jeez.
Right? So in 8 weeks, I'm out at 6 in the morning, watering and that's just watering my vegetable patch and my apple trees because they're young. because I put them in and I'm not losing them. So we have been banned. We've had a hosepipe ban now for 4 weeks. The farmers round here, so they grow tobacco, maize for animal feed, wheat, and walnuts. So the walnuts take care of themselves because they're putting down roots deep enough to be able to reach the aquifer. And we're on limestone here, so it's very free draining. There's no such thing as mud here. I've never seen mud in 5 years. The maize, it's all dried up. They're cutting it down now, but they're not ploughing it back in because the soil is like dust.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing they're watering now is the tobacco because they can get a reasonable return on the tobacco.
So 2 things. First off, can't imagine mud appearing too much when it's been 2 months without rain. No, I know in the winter, but even in the winter. Tobacco. Now, you're not doing tobacco, but what's involved in that? Not a thing I've really seen.
They buy the plants as like plug plants, and they must. The thing is with France, everything's very cooperative. So if you were further south and you were doing grapevines, you don't buy your equipment. Everyone shares the equipment. And what they do when they're having the harvest, so they're starting to do the vidange just now, and they'll take all the grapes in their trucks and in their trailers, and they take them to a cooperative, and they process everything, and they'll give you the reading when you arrive, so you know how much you're putting in, and then they test it with an ABV calculator, and they'll give you a slip saying you've got so many litres, this is the ABV, and you can either get that back if you're a very good name, if you're a chateau name, or it goes into the Van de Pays, the normal plonk you buy in the supermarket. So they all share the equipment, and it's sort of like when you have the shearing crews go around in the UK. There's a kind of order, and you've got your place in the pecking order. So nobody has to employ shearers themselves. You're using the same gang, and they go from place to place to place. And it's like that here. The tobacco's the same. They grow the tobacco. Now, at the end of my driveway, there is a huge polytunnel, and I mean huge. And they cut the tobacco, and it's hung upside down, and they have dryers now. Last year, when we came here at first, all you could hear at night was the dryers going to dry the tobacco.
Right.
And the smell's incredible. And then they spend a week, they're in rubber aprons and rubber gloves, rolling the tobacco ready to sell it on. Now, we're 20 minutes from Sarlat, and Sarlat used to be the big centre of the tobacco industry for probably the whole of Perigord. And everybody just took it there, and everything was processed there. That's gone now. So they ship it somewhere else, but my French isn't good enough to be able to find out where they ship it to. So,
is Perigord a thing that I should know what that is? I don't know what that means.
It's like a shire. So it's Bedfordshire or Grampian or the Highlands. We've got the Perigord. Now we're just over the border. We're in the Lot, which is much more agricultural. Perigord is very touristy, but it's lovely, and it suits us better here.
So I've got a few questions. Vidange, I believe you said.
Vidange, it's the grape harvest.
Okay.
And they've got, again, depending on whereabouts in the area you are, and if you're on a slope or you're on the flat, if you grow red grapes, you grow white grapes. If you're making red wine, you're making white wine, you're making rosé. They harvest it all at different times.
Right.
So the trouble is we haven't had rain. So the grapes are quite small, but they're full of sugar. So it's going to be high alcohol wine, but not an awful lot of it. So in a couple of years' time, what they'll do is if they're harvesting now, you get Beaujolais Nouveau, which is the first produced wine of the year, which is towards the end of November. They have a Beaujolais Nouveau night, and all the pubs get crates and crates and crates of Beaujolais Nouveau. It's horrible. They jack it. It is horrible. It's horrible. They jack the alcohol level up by adding sugar. And it's such a young wine. It's really sharp, whereas no one here drinks young wine. They all, because everyone drinks wine here, it's like breathing. So the wine's really cheap. So you can go into a supermarket and you can buy a bottle of wine for €2.
Honestly,
Honestly.
jeez, it'll be at least 3.5 times that year, at least.
Well, I mean, so it's Beaujolais Nouveau. That's the beginning of November, but most of the good wines, they'll lay it down for a couple of years. Wines that are going to be made into port, they put it into barrels. You could be waiting 10 years for that.
Right.
But it's lovely. You can go and you can do wine tastings. It's fantastic. But nobody drinks bad wine here.
Oh, I can imagine that. I can imagine that, definitely. What was the other one? Van de Pie?
Van de Pie, like wine of the area. So it's a local wine.
Yep.
So where I am at the moment, my local wine is Cahors. So they do Malbec.
Right.
And they'll just do a Cahors red wine. So if you go into a bar and you say, oh, I have a bottle of table wine, it'll be Cahors red wine. Where I used to live, we were near Pechamont. It's a nice wine. So that was the wine of that area. And then you've got Bergerac. That's another AOC. So you can get a Bergerac wine. But they're all different.
Is that the inspector? Is that the same? That where he was?
Like a quality control. It's like when you used to get milk and it was in bottles, you get the red cap, the silver cap, and the gold cap.
Yes.
So the red and silver cap was really like semi-skimmed guff, right? And then you got the silver cap, which is what everybody drunk. And then if you were really posh, you had the gold cap and it sat on your doorstep and there was like 1.5 inches of cream in the top.
Lovely. Bloody lovely.
It's a bit like that. So, and of course, people have different tastes. So I like Chardonnay. My future daughter-in-law is a Sauvignon Blanc girl, and she won't drink Chardonnay.
I couldn't tell you the difference. I know what you've said are both white. That's all I've got. Do you know, this is actually quite useful for me, Lorraine, I'll be honest, because this is number 61. Number 66, we've got a guy called Jason from Tablas Creek, which is a big American wine company, I believe. Californian, coming on. So I'm learning some things here so I don't fully embarrass myself. But I do have a question here, and I think I know the answer. But if I don't, I'm going to look like a fool. So when we say Malbec, when we say Chardonnay, Sauvignon, Cabernet, whatever, I'm going to embarrass myself here. Is that the grape?
Usually that is the grape.
Right.
Now, this will confuse you even more because I was writing about this in this last book. People who want to, I want to make my own wine. Champagne is made with 2 different kinds of grapes. Now, champagne's clear-ish. So everyone assumes that it's made out of white grapes, but it's not. It's made out of a mixture of white grapes and Pinot Noir grapes. Now, noir means black.
Black, yeah.
They're little black grapes. But when they press the juice out of it, they don't let the juice sit in the skin, because that is what gives wine its colour. So if you want a red wine, you let it sit on the skins.
Do you know, I'm actually quite impressed with myself for once, because as you were speaking, I'd never considered this, but as you were speaking, that was before you mentioned that, I was thinking this, because the inside of a red grape isn't red. Yeah, it's pretty much see-through.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And champagne is just, well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is what I've always been under the impression. Champagne is just a sparkling wine using grapes from that region.
From that area.
Right?
That's right. And anyone else who makes a sparkling wine in France cannot call it champagne. So what they do, they call it Cremant. So because it's a creamy, fizzy. I mean, no one drinks Prosecco because Prosecco isn't French. They're very, very supportive of their own agriculture here. So you can find cheddar in the shops, but the cheddar bit in the shop is like that size. And the French cheese bit in the shop is like 4 aisles.
That's good though. We need to do that here. I mean, God, to find, well, no, that's cheese is a bad example because there's a lot of British cheeses, but you know, for example, Tesco, it's like New Zealand, lamb, Irish, which is fine. Irish makes sense, but yeah, you know, it's that's good that that's the case. That's refreshing to see. There's maybe one more question I think I've got about wine, but in fairness, I say that and then normally bring about 6 questions. But right, let me get this right. I was doing a bit of looking into wine, and correct me if I'm wrong again. I feel like I'm going to say that a lot today. A wine that is clear, i.e., not cloudy, can't be vegan on the basis that it is often used egg whites to clear it or tannins. Is that correct, or is that nonsense?
Right. Clearing any alcohol, there are ways of doing it now. I'm going to bang on about cider because I make country wines. I don't really make wines with grapes because I'm surrounded by it, and at €2 a bottle,
well, it's pointless.
I'm making it. Right? But I make elderflower wine, I make elderberry wine, and I make a lot of cider. Now, I remember going to the second professional course on cider making, and there was people there from Poland and South Africa, and these are guys that have done this for years. And to make a kind of icebreaker at the beginning of the thing, you know, because nobody wants to talk first because they're all a bit shy, he said, bring a bottle of whatever you make and we'll open it and we'll have a look at it and we'll all taste it. So I took a bottle of mine and he's looking at me, and there was a guy there, I don't know if I should, there was a guy there from Cornish Orchards, right? And he sat next to me because we'd both driven up from Cornwall separately. And he said, do you filter that? And I said, no, can't afford the filter. And he said, but it's really clear. And I said, I bottle it on a really cold day. And he went, you do not. And I went, I do. And he went, but you must have, he says, you must have filtered it. And I said, I don't filter it. I can't afford the filter. And so we got talking about it. We were tasting each other's, and the guy who was doing the course, he's a real big shot in the industry. And he said, that's some malolactic fermentation in there. And I said, is it?
I was just about to say the same thing.
And he said, oh yes, I can taste it's almost like a Chardonnay. There's buttery notes and a hint of vanilla and, you know, all this stuff. And I said, oh, right, that'll be when I moved the barrel and I stirred up, you know, the lees at the bottom of the barrel. And I said, when I put the airlock back on, I did get an extra bit of fizz for a couple of days, but I said, then I left the doors of the shed open because it was like freezing cold. It was December. And that makes the yeast fall out of suspension. Now, you're talking about it must be vegan, right? So finings, you can use finings to clear a lot of wine, and it depends on how much pectin that there is. And some fruits have more than others, which is why even with cider, you can get a really clear, bright, shiny cider, and then from a tree next door to you, and you produce cider the same way, it'll be cloudy, and it's because of the amount of pectin. Now, in a cider, some people really like that. They're not bothered whether it's clear or not. But in a wine, people are very suspicious. So they use the finings, and the finings, if I'm not mistaken, come from some fish thing, like a byproduct, and that's what they use. And therefore, if they use the finings, or they can use bentonite, I think, as well, but I've never used them.
Right.
So if I'm making, well, elderberry is very dark, it doesn't matter, but if I'm making elderflower, when I'm going to take it off for bottling, I put the demijohns outside on a cold night, and then I just bottle it in the morning, and that just makes the yeast fall out of suspension.
Now that is interesting. You know, it's funny, you were saying that at the start of it, he's all talking about it, and I was like, I watched The Big Bang Theory, and sometimes they have a laugh with each other, and I don't know what's happened. That's how I felt. I was like, what has been said right now? I don't understand a word that has been said. So, you know, we've done this a few times. We spoke about something that ran away somewhere else. It's been good. On back to the cider thing, not back to, we're talking about it. We spoke about trees and whatnot, and you said you had 15 trees, right?
Yep.
That, and pardon my ignorance here, that does not sound like many trees.
It's not.
But how many litres of cider are you producing where you are?
Right, now I've just planted an orchard when we arrived here last year, and the trees were sitting in pots ready to go. So we knew we were moving in 2019. We knew. So I took grafts off the trees that I had in Dordogne, grafted them onto rootstocks, put them into giant pots, and I kept them. So they're out there now. We've got a tiny wee problem in the next couple of months now, because we've got to put a new filter bed in for a septic tank. And the guy has been round and he's saying, there must be no trees within 3 metres. And I'm like, oh God. And I said, well, I have to move 6 trees. Well, you must move the trees because you cannot have the trees near the filter bed. So I'm now going to have to move a bit of fence into my sheep field so that I've got room for all these extra trees that I'm now going to have to move. And I can't move them until the beginning of January because we don't have a dormant season here till January. So 15 trees. At maturity, I use MM106 rootstock because they've got some disease resistant. They grow into a semi-dwarfing half standard tree. You need to know what rootstock you're having, because the last thing you want is to be planting M25s, which is what they used to plant in all the old English orchards. And then you need like cherry pickers to pick the fruit. I like an easy life. I want to be able to do that and grab an apple, or at the very most, if I'm not shaking the tree to get the apples down, then I can put a ladder up. So I want 10 foot, 12 foot maximum. So I use MM106.
Can you just quickly explain what MM106 means?
Right.
I hope you've kicked your feet up and got comfy and enjoying another fantastic episode of the R2Kast with another really interesting guest. I would just like to quickly take another second to plug the sponsors of the show today, the Scottish Farmer, and I would strongly advise you to go out and pick one up this week and see even more of the fantastic people that are in our industry.
Merton Malling rootstocks back in the post-war era, when they were trying to maximise research and maximise crops on British plants. So this is the era when they were doing lots of potato. You were talking about Aaron Pilot and Aaron, right? So this is the time where they were doing that to try and get Britain producing enough food after the war to be able to be exporting to loads of different countries. So they did it on apples, they did it on potatoes, they did it on wheat, they did it all through agriculture, and it was brilliant for the industry. And apple trees are divided into different sorts of rootstocks. So M9 is a really dwarfing, it's the ones you'll see on patios, they're like a stalk with apples on them. MM106 is kind of in the middle. M25 is the really big old-fashioned orchards. The numbers don't mean anything because they were just randomly allocated numbers when the seedlings were growing. And then some of them, they were just saying it's too straggly, or it's not strong enough, or this one's too vigorous, and they were weeding them all out and just keeping the best ones. So there's about 5 or 6. They're doing new rootstocks now, but they're not really commercially available unless you're one of the big commercial cider growers. So I don't know too much about them.
Right. And do you bottle yourself? That sounds a daft question. I assume you do.
I brought all my equipment with me. I have apple washing facilities, which is basically a big tub. I have a scratter for pulping.
Yep.
And then I have a press. Now, when I wanted a press, I'm very lucky. My husband is trained as a blacksmith. His dad was a blacksmith. And I was showing him a picture and I said, I want one of these, but I don't want to pay £5,000 for it. Can you make one? And he said, is that the best? And I said, no, we can go onto their site and we can download all the how to put it together thing. So he made one for less than £200.
Oh, excellent.
I love him. He's so good.
Not just because of the building
Not
capabilities.
just because of that, no. But he made the press, and it's dismantleable, so we can move it. So when we were in Cornwall, we could go and we could take it if we were teaching, if we were showing people how to do apple pressing, or if we were invited into an orchard to take their apples and pulp them, and we could take the juice away from on site. So the press was made. So the press is now here. And he built me a pasteuriser. So I went to see my friend David Berwick, who runs St Ives Cider, and he'd paid someone for a Bath pasteuriser, and we went to see it, and John took some photos of it, and then we came back and he made one for me.
This is very handy.
It's available for rent if you're interested, Wallace.
What was that?
Available for rent.
Yeah. Honestly, I am the most unnacky person on this planet. It's actually quite funny, just how useless I am at these things.
I think these things skip generations.
Well, they must have skipped 2 because my dad can't either.
You'll be listening.
Okay, yeah, he's not going to deny it. Trust me. I don't know what my papa was like, but my old man and I are certainly as handless as they come. So I feel like I've asked this question a few times, but
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you because you said 15 apple trees isn't an awful lot. Now, the other thing about apple trees, because it's quite complicated, but you get some apple trees that are diploid, which means that particular variety only needs one other different type of apple to pollinate it. And they're your average run-of-the-mill Coxes, whatever, right? Discovery, Gala. But you get triploids. And triploids need 2 different varieties to pollinate them. So Bramley is a triploid. There's a great apple called Renette d'Orleans, which is, you can use it for juice, you can eat it as an apple, you can put it in cider, you can cook it. It's a brilliant apple. Now, triploids tend to be more vigorous, right? So I've got maybe 3 out of the 15 that are triploids. And MM106s, you could go and get apples within 3 years, and you're almost at full cropping within 5 to 7 years. Now, for a normal tree in a normal climatic British condition where it gets enough water, you could take 25 to 30 pounds, I don't know what that is in kilos, of apples off one tree. Now that's quite a bit.
It's about probably 12, 13 kilos.
Right. Okay. So it's not too bad, but you will get trees that it's just, I mean, I went to do a talk for someone, and I will be discreet here. They'd bought a farm with a large acreage, but they weren't farmers, and they planted thousands of apple trees. They had someone come in and commercially plant thousands of apple trees because they were going to make juice and it was going to sell. And I said, where are you going to store all the apples? So that's a lot of apples. And I said, how are you going to move the apples? How are you going to harvest them? Are you going to employ staff? Are they going to be, seasonal staff? You have to think all these things through. And then I said, now, imagining in 6 or 7 years' time where you're starting to get a really good harvest and you're doing all this juicing, the minute you bottle that, your sell-by date is ticking. Mm-hmm. How are you going to move that amount if you don't already have a contract to supply someone? And they just looked at me and I thought, they've not thought this through. And I thought, I better not say anything else, because this is the thing. For me and John, there's 2 of us here. Now, I'm happy to make a little bit of cider for myself, and I'm happy to make juice for myself and for my friends, but I'm not doing it commercially. This is what I do for fun. So 15 trees is plenty for me. And I can pick an apple, when they're having fruit on them, I can pick an apple from the beginning of August to the beginning of January. And that means I've got fruit for juicing, fruit for cider, fruit for the freezer. I can make applesauce, I can make pies, I can, you know, even give my friends if they want.
Can you eat those apples, Lane? Or are they not? They're not eating.
You can eat dessert apples, and I do know someone who eats cooking apples, but they're not my taste. A cider apple is a different creature altogether. Now, the worst cider apple I've ever bitten into is, oh God, now what's it called? Oh gosh, I can't remember. I can see it. I can see a picture of it. And it was like biting into a black tea bag flavoured piece of cotton wool.
Sounds lovely.
The cotton wool's like the texture, it's really dry and kind of soft, but it's not juicy. And the taste is such an astringent taste. It's like sucking a cross between a lemon and a tea bag. They're disgusting. But the funny thing is, when you juice them and you put them into apple juice alongside a dessert apple, it balances it completely. And you're not tasting that cotton woolly lemony. You're not tasting that.
So are most ciders made with your cider apple and dessert apple? Is that?
Well, I don't. I make a mix now. The dessert fruit are usually ripening before the cider fruit. So what I do is I will harvest, press, and juice my dessert fruit first, and then I'll leave that to ferment. So it takes at least 3 months to ferment. So if I'm picking in August, September, that cider is ready by Christmas time.
Okay,
Now, that's very young, but 3 months is about the earliest. And then what I'll do is I'll leave it in the barrel. So it's got an airlock on it and there's no oxygen can touch it and it's fine in a cool place. And then in October, November, I'll do the cider apples. And then come March, I'll blend the two ciders. And then that is, again, it depends on your own taste now. When I used to sell cider, you'd say to people, hello, would you like to try some cider? And they go, oh yes. I'll say, and what kind of cider do you like? Oh, I like mine dry. And I'm like, really? Okay. So I give them some dry and they go, ugh! And I say, so you don't like it dry, you like it cool. But they think it's dry, and it seems to be like a badge of honour amongst older guys, sorry, but they all say, oh yes, I like it dry, because it's like a real man thing to, and I say to my son, who's 25, what do you like? And he said, Mum, I like it like Strongbow. So I say, so you want it quite sweet and you want it fizzy? Yes, Mum. So I made him a cider like that, and he loves it. But, everybody likes different things.
I feel like I'm going to be judged for this one, but I too am a 25-year-old man, as far as I'm aware, and I am a porn star martini man. Definitely, every time.
You haven't met a cider you have found that suits you yet?
I've tried a lot, and no, I have not.
I've now made here a tiny little bit of French cider, which is caved cider. And that's quite hard to do in the UK because we don't have the right temperatures, but over here it's very cold in the winter. So I've made a little bit of caved cider, and what happens is you get the leaves at the bottom, like normal, you get the cider in the middle, and you have this thing, it's called a chapeau brun, a brown cap.
Okay.
Right? And the cider that is in the middle is a naturally sweet, naturally sparkling cider. And this is the holy grail. But you have to have the right climate for it. That's not why we moved here. It's just, we've done it. It works. And that's lovely. But I can't get it any more alcoholic than 4%.
Okay. And what was that called? Sorry, Lorraine? What was the name of it?
It's called here, it's called Cider Boucher, but it's called caved cider. So that's Keeved. Caved cider. And it's lovely. But if you don't like cider and it's not your bag, then you know, it's fine. Have wine or, you know, whatever. Creme de souris. It just depends on what you like.
Creme de Cider, what could that be? That could
That is an alcoholic version, a much stronger alcoholic version of elderflower wine.
oh, lovely.
So instead of just making an elderflower wine and you ferment the elderflower
Yeah.
with a little bit of sugar to help it on, instead of just doing that, you make it with a thing called eau de vie. This is turning into total drink. I mean, right.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
we'll
total drink with a French lesson.
That's
So,
fine. Right. So eau de vie is a base spirit like vodka or gin or whatever, Bacardi or whatever, rum. So eau de vie, you wouldn't drink it on its own. It's really, really strong. The French have it as an aperitif or as a digestive at the end of the meal.
okay.
But they're flavoured, so you can have eau de vie made from plums. So it's clear, but there's a plummy taste. And the creme de souris is made with elderflower. It's lovely. It's 16%, and it's just
Jesus
ice cubes and this and just a dash of soda or water, and it's lovely.
That's
When are you coming?
a spirit liqueur percentage. That is. Yeah, no.
I'll put some in the fridge for you.
Excellent. I'll be right over or right down. Do you know what? This is taking me back. I'm actually really enjoying sort of hearing the French words and I pick some bits up that I understand. But when I was at school, Mrs. Fletcher, if you're listening, I'm really, really sorry. We had to do our speaking. I was the same. Hated it. We had to do our speaking exam, and I ran into the class before Mrs. Fletcher did, and it just put on the wall behind her on the notice boards at our desk what I had to say, and I'm sitting, flying through it, and I realised someone else had done it. I was reading their one. So I was just talking a lot of nonsense. She was asking me the questions that I knew she was going to ask me, and I'm thinking, Christ, I know the answer here. She asking me something about the colour of the car, and I'm talking my favourite furniture is the table or something, so I haven't done that too well. Lorraine, I could sit here and ask you questions about wine and cider for days and just wish I was getting drunk, to be honest, but I should maybe just come down to France.
You know what I am? I'm happy to come back on.
Well, perfect. But there's one more thing we haven't really got into just before we sort of like to end is you've documented this as you go. You've got a lot of books out there. Yeah. Were you always a book person? What drew you to doing that?
Well, I think like most young lasses, I was writing romantic books when I was in my teens.
Okay.
And I never ever got to the end of any of them. So. And I'm sure my mum went under my bed, as mothers do, and pulled them out and told my dad I was writing smut or whatever. But I started with it. It was probably when I was working for the Rural Business School, and I was making up lesson plans and I was putting together courses, and I started writing articles for Country Smallholder and smallholding magazines. And there's nothing quite like getting something that you've written into print, and if you've got a family like my family, you're like, look, they're going, yeah. No one's interested. But I was glad. So it's like I'd cut it out of the magazine and I'd keep it and all the rest of it. And then I decided to write a full-length book. And at the same time that I decided to write that, I was approached by a publisher. And they wanted me to write something completely different. They just said, write a book about smallholding. And I said, it's been done. It's been done to death. There is no point in writing another book about smallholding because there's loads of books out there of various degrees of excellence. And I said, what you need is a different line. And he said, so what do you want to do? And I said, let's write a book about how to make smallholding pay. Because I said, that's the holy grail and no one can do it. And I said, but I've done it. So I wrote that and didn't really get on with the publisher. I'll be very honest, because the book finished and I had to do all the edits, and they chopped quite a bit of, I thought, important stuff out. So we had a wee bit of a Barney online, hotkeys, and John saying, "What's the matter? Don't talk to me." And then they sent me this cover that they were going to put, and I went, "You're not putting that on my book." And I said, what is that? What? You can't even see it, And I said, "It's brown. No one in their life has ever brought a brown book. We're not having that cover." So I designed a cover and sent it back, and that got up their nose a wee bit more. So after selling a good couple of thousand of books, we parted ways.
Wow.
Yeah, and I made very little out of it, but we won't go there. So by that time, I'd already been bitten by the bug, and I was already through the second book, which was basically how to move to France and live the good life in France. So it's smallholding in France.
I was going to say, was that good life that in the mansion, like good life, or the small good life?
Well, it came out when I was living in the mansion. But I've since done a second edition, which is bang up to date, which is great, and it's selling all right as well. And then I felt like I'm beginning to be a wee bit like a one-trick pony, and there's only so much small-holding stuff I can write. So I thought, I'll write a murder book. I was in the police. I know how to do this. I know
You saw it straight away.
Yeah, and then I just sat and I wrote, and I was like, it was lovely. I was really enjoying it. It was based on a true murder, and
honestly, I wrote this story about murder. What I did not expect to hear was it was lovely.
It was great. Right, 3 guys die. Sorry, my brother said, "Do all the men in the book die?" And I said, "Well, 3 of them die." And he went, "Do you not think that's a bit sexist?" I went, "They deserved it. They deserved it." So they all die. It's set in a farm, and the 3 of them die, and every method is a method that you could get away with dead easily, not get caught.
Okay, that's fun. Not fun. I mean,
it is a women's book. There's a lot in it that's a kind of women's book, but so many people have written and they've sent me messages saying, I bought 6 copies and I gave one to my mum and one to my granny and one to my auntie, right. and they've loved it, which is great. So I had that out, and then I've just finished one. It's coming out in October. I've got to wait for the cover. And it's called Murder at the Moulin. So it's set at a watermill.
Okay.
But it's quite funny as well. And the only person that dies at the end is the guy who's trying to commit all the murders. So that's a wee bit of karma getting back to him. But it was nice to write. And then next week, according to my girl who's doing the formatting, because she's just finishing the index, I will have my booze book out, which is called Grow Your Own Booze. And believe it or not, I wrote that in under 5 weeks.
Honestly,
I was so into it. I mean, the information was here, Wallace. I mean, I know cider, I know how to make beer, I know how to make wine, and it was just a case of getting it down. And it started off as a book on how to make cider, and then I thought, I need to put Perry in, because Perry's from pears. So it's just, and then I thought, I need to put elderflower wine in, and I thought, oh my God, I should put something in about mead. So it just sort of snowballed. So it was great, and it was like my daughter's doing her PhD, and she's saying, "How many words have you written today?" And I'll say 10,000. She went, "Mum!" So it was great fun.
10,000 in a day. Yeah. I think my record was 5.5.
I write in the morning. I get up at 6 and I finish at 11. And sometimes I'll go back in the day and give it a wee read through, but I will literally sit and just chunter away for hours on the laptop or on the desktop.
That is a ridiculous WPM. That's some quick typing.
And then you read it back the next day and you see your wee spelling mistakes and you're correcting them. And then as you're reading it, you're thinking, that's not right. I need to change that. But it's great and I love it. So at the moment, I'm in this hiatus. So Grow Your Own Booze is out next week. Murder at the Moulin is out in October. And I promised I would sit and I'd say, right, I'm not going to do any more writing for a while. So that lasted a week, right? And this is my notebook. And it's got all the characters for another murder. And this page, it's about poisons. So this is all poisonous plants, some of which are non-detectable.
Well, I'm actually gonna try and see if this actually benefits you, and you haven't already written it down, and it somehow ends up in a book. I'm gonna feel so important. There's a poisonous plant called Lily of the Valley.
Yes. Convalarius majoris.
Oh, you already know. You know, I don't know if you know how I know that. I just finished the episode in Breaking Bad where they use it. Yeah, so I thought I'd maybe broke some ground there, but obviously not. So, well, yeah, writing books. Authoring doesn't seem like the right word. Writing's certainly something that's up your street. You know, I'm going to say something that's going to, not if it'll offend you, but you'll be like, oh my god, I have never, not once, read a book in my entire life. It's probably why I can't talk correctly. My dad hadn't read a book until I believe he was 56. Bit of a running theme here. We're not readers, but some of those books sound really interesting. Do you see that being a thing that you'll just continue doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
My husband never reads anything of mine.
Right.
I'll tell you a wee bit about my husband. So he's very quiet. He's 64 now. And because I was teaching for the Dutch College and the Rural Business School, and John's a really clever guy. He's really intelligent. And he's a blacksmith to trade, but he's a welder fabricator. That's what his qualifications are in. So I said to him, why don't you go and get a teaching qualification, and you can teach this because you've got so much knowledge, you've got so much skills. And he said, I'm not comfortable with it because he can't read very well.
Okay.
He's a bit dyslexic. And he went to Cornwall College in St Austell. And at that time where he was going there to do his 10-week mini teaching course, they were starting to develop, how can we make this more accessible for people who struggle to read? Mm-hmm. And it was using different colour papers and spacing out paragraphs so there was more clear space on a page. And that really helped him. And when he was teaching the boys welding, because welding is such a tactile thing, you're either a welder or you're not. Now, unfortunately, in today's world, you need the qualification, the bit of paper, as well as being able to weld. And some of these boys, they couldn't even write their name. Mm-hmm. So John was saying, I'll arrange it with the college. We'll get it to be an oral exam. Lorraine will read the questions out. You go into another room. Lorraine will read the question out. So we did some of it as a multiple choice, and we did a couple of them as written answers. And they just told me, I wrote it down, then I read it back to them. And I said, look, there's no time constraint. Just take your time. If you don't know the answer, I'll just go over them again and again. And I said, like, there's 4 choices. You know, only one of them's right. So, you know, and it worked really well for us. And the crowning glory of that was he came in one day from teaching and he said, do you remember that guy that couldn't write his name on the top of the question paper? And he said he's got a full-time job welding now in Newquay. Right. And he said he phoned me up to the college and left a message just thanking me. And he says, and that's what makes it worthwhile. And that is so true. And I mean, John's dad was a farrier blacksmith, and he was saying, I'm so proud of you. You've done what I couldn't. But, I mean, and he can read, and he sees my books, and he hears me talking about them. But he won't pick one up and read because 211 pages is a step too far from him. But he did say if it gets made into a movie at some point in the future, he'll go to the movie with me.
I was going to say the exact same thing. And in fairness to John, he probably spends enough time with you to almost know what's been written anyway.
But the thing is, we've all got skills. And I think people who work with their hands tend to absorb information different ways, and they don't need to take that from what they're reading. I mean, he can watch YouTube videos once and he's got it, and he'll go out and he'll do it. And I'm glad to see that modern teaching is beginning to be like that, because these kids that come out from school and they feel they're not academic, they've got nothing going for them. That's just not the case. It's not the case.
Agreed.
Recognising that more.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I've called out schools a few times. I think it's way too this, and this, and if you're not good at this, and this, it doesn't matter, and you're a failure and whatnot. And it's just not true. We bring a lot of students in from 15-year-old all the way to, I think the oldest student I've had was 54, with various knowledge bases and lack of knowledge bases, and abilities and lack of abilities, and seeing them transition from that August to that June is refreshing. For want of a better word, it's just the most rewarding thing on the planet. And you see these kids that come as kids, there's no other word, they are kids, and they leave as young adults and stuff, and they leave fulfilling what they believed and maybe were told they never would, which is brilliant.
This is the thing, this is like me going right back to failing arithmetic O grade 3 times. And I remember my father saying, you'll never make anything of yourself, you can't even add up simple sums. And I said, I can count money. And I said, and I'm no fool. And when I went to the police exam to get into the police, it's a 3-part thing. There's a listening bit, there's a written exam, and there's a maths exam. And I'm sitting there going, oh God, it's maths. And then he called me in afterwards, and he said, well, Miss Jimison, how do you think you did? And I said, did I get any right? And he went, nope. And I said, did I get the one about the compass right? And he went, nope. And he said, so technically I should fail you. He said, 18 questions, and he says, and you get 18 maths questions wrong. And I said to him, but if I see somebody running down the road and they've got 3 bags of swag over their shoulder, I can tell you it's 3 bags of swag. And he went, you're in.
The important part, isn't it? You don't have to do algebra.
Well, I said to him, if I ever need somebody to work out a sum when I'm in the police, which I don't really think I will, I says, I've got a tongue in my head and I can ask them.
Yeah.
And he said, it's all about confidence. And he said, don't ever let anyone tell you you're a dumpling, because he said, you're not.
I'm going to assume you don't lack confidence.
I see things like, they always ask you in a job interview, what do you think are your strengths? And then they say to you, what do you think are your weaknesses? And I'll say, I don't think I have any weaknesses. I think I have things that I can improve, but I look at that as a challenge. And that's the way I look at life. And yeah, there's days where things get you down. I mean, if anyone in farming will tell you, a drought, flooding, the price of feed for animals, the fact that people will not pay a decent amount of money for the things that we produce for them. And it's demoralising, because farming's not like a job that you can give up and go and get another job, because it's in your blood, and usually it's in your family, and it's been in you there for generations. Now, I haven't had that, but I know how I would feel. And it's to say to these people, we all have bad days, and some of us have worse days than others, but we're a big community and we support each other. And as long as you recognise, things aren't going well, and you've got someone on the end of a phone that you can talk to, and the smallest idea might come from a chance conversation, and that could be the turning point. When I was working in my small holding and we made a loss for 3 years, that was really hard for us, because we were digging into the money that we'd put aside, emergency money, and we were starting to think, oh my God, we're going to have to go and get proper jobs. What's going to happen? They might make us leave. And then it was a friend of mine from North Wales who said, you should be doing your cider commercially. And I never looked back from that. From that conversation, I never looked back. And it's the smallest things like that that can be the turning point. But to get to that point, you need to admit to yourself, look, things aren't great here, and talk to someone and move on from there.
Yeah.
And the decisions aren't always easy ones, but
Definitely.
you've got a choice.
Well, yes, agreed completely. And I think sometimes a lot of people I've had on have said sometimes the best decisions are, not quite often actually, the best decisions are made when you're in that position where you're like, shit, I have got to do something here. I don't know what that thing is, but I'm going to do it.
Yep.
No, I've been aware of you for some time, Lorraine, just on social media and whatnot. And if you are listening, guys, and you want to follow Lorraine Sustainable Small Holding on Facebook. I haven't seen you on Instagram. Are you on Instagram? I'm not sure.
I don't
More
like
Twitter.
I'm on it, but I don't like it. I'm on Twitter, but I'm very political on Twitter. Don't go to Twitter. Don't go and look
Right.
at myself on Twitter. It's
Okay.
very political. But I've started making little YouTube videos.
Brilliant.
They're very Scottish, obviously. And I'm not in an awful lot of them because it's me usually doing the filming, but I'm hoping to do more of that. It's an aid memoir for me for when I developed dementia, and then I can't remember how to do things, and it's things about like grafting apple trees, and I put one on this morning about John fixing the wood burner and all the rest of it. So
fantastic. Well, is it Sustainable Small Holding as well on YouTube?
yeah.
Yeah.
But the easiest place to find me that's got the most interest, I think, would be on the Facebook page Spotty Dog Cider, or the Facebook page Sustainable Small Holding. So I'm hoping to add more onto Spotty Dog Cider because I haven't been there really since I kind of left Cornwall. There's a few things, but I'm hoping to add a lot more. Because we're trying to do a pressing this year and I want to do a couple of videos and put them on there. But yeah, so
just out of interest, right, I've got 3 questions here that are all related, right? And the first one might just knock it out of the park. How close are you to that Summit de la Vage? Or do you not know what that is?
How close am I to
Summit de la Vage? Maybe you don't know that.
Oh, I've never heard of it. But if it's the winemakers conference, I'm probably not anywhere near it.
No, it's not. It's that. It's the massive livestock show. Where is it? Because I'm hopefully planning on taking students there. Right, Summit de la Vage. Where is it? Clermont-Ferrand.
That is about 2.5 hours northeast of us.
Well, basically, and this might not be a thing that comes through. I'm hopefully planning on taking students there to see that, but we're going to have 2 days to sort of just do a bit of touring of stuff in France, and I don't know if you would be a place that we could come and look at. I don't know if pressing would fit in with that, but that would be the other time of year, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be.
Well, I've got family coming in a week's time here, and then I am coming to Scotland on the 9th of September to the 15th. So I will not do any pressing here until October. And the wine thing is on now until probably mid-September. But that's the majority. There's Cahors wine, which is south of us, about an hour.
Yeah.
But the majority of the wine is Bordeaux, which is about 2 hours west of us.
Well, we can think about it as we go. But it's, as I said, go check out Lorraine on those different channels. As we all know, there's still 2 questions to ask before we finish. First off, Lorraine, you've done a lot of these as we go, to be honest. But if you had any and you're a really good person for this, if you had any tips for folk getting into farming or anything like yourself, small holding, for example, what would they be? And 2, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
5 years time, probably still here, probably writing books, probably have a lot more sheep. My sheep are lovely. What would I say to someone? Right, money's the trick. If you haven't got the money to buy yourself a small holding, then you've got a couple of ways into it. Now, a lot of people buy land on hope value to try and get permission to put either a temporary dwelling or a permanent house on it, you need money to do that, and you need nerves of steel. Now, I did the agricultural tie for 11 years, and it was nerve-wracking. It was nerve-wracking because at any time you could have an enforcement officer turn up and demand to know how you were fulfilling the tie. If you haven't got nerves of steel, or if you have a young family, I would say just don't do it.
Okay.
Just don't do it. I mean, I have a lot of nerve, and I was a nervous wreck. I would say your other method is possibly to marry a farmer or marry into a farming family, or to get some sort of job either with the National Trust or in a farming situation, that kind of thing. Now, I mean, I've gone through agricultural college, and I can thoroughly recommend it. Now, there are agricultural colleges and there are agricultural colleges. And I would say to anyone, don't pick the place that's nearest to home, because leaving home is a good thing and it turns you into an adult and you learn how to be self-reliant. Both my kids went away. My son went to Manchester from Cornwall, so we saw him about 3 times a year. And my daughter's went, at the start of it, she went to York, and then she went to Oxford, and she's still at Oxford now. But it was the making of them. So don't always pick the place closest to home. Pick a course that you're going to enjoy doing, not one that your mum or dad want you to do. Now, I think there has to be an element of compromise there, but, you know, without putting too fine a point on it, your mum and dad have had their life. And unless you're a complete 17-year-old idiot that really doesn't have a clue, you have got to make your life to be what you want, because there is nothing worse than getting up every morning to go to a job you hate.
Oh, couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
I mean, it might not be their thing. My mother was gobsmacked because I wanted to, even then at 17, I wanted to go and work with sheep. And my family are lawyers and doctors. And she was black affronted. You know, it's going to be a common labourer. And I said, I'm not going to be a common labourer. I want to do this. Then I want to get a teaching qualification. And then I want to help other people learn how to do it. She couldn't see it. I was lucky because I am confident, and I knew that if I worked other jobs, I would get there eventually. And I've always had that focus. And I would say to people, if it's something that you really want to do, go for it, because you get one life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a common labourer. You know, whatever you want to do is what matters, and the way I see it. But no, it's been really good to chat, Lorraine. Time flies by. That's been an hour and a half, roughly. It really does go quick.
Yes, I've got to go for my very cheap demi-pichet of white wine for €2.
Well, yeah, I've got to let you go and do that, because it'll be 8:30 where you are, so better let you do that. But I hope you've enjoyed coming on. I hope you've enjoyed.
It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed talking, and I hope when you speak to your wine man that you come back to me at some point and then you say, I've got more questions for you about wine.
So just for reference, right, it's we're filming this, guys that are listening, on Tuesday the 23rd of August, but I had a training day at uni today at work, and I was conscious it was about 8 hours today. I must have asked about 40 questions. I could just feel everyone else, like, it's all like the lecturers or the students for the day, and they're like, Wallace, would you shut the up? Like, how can you have so many questions? But I'm like that with everything, so I probably will.
But this is because you're interested.
Yeah, well, that's it, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you and I both know there's nothing worse. You go into a classroom and you're delivering a lesson and there's not a peep. And
I'll be honest, with me, that's not normally the case with me. I'm a bit too high energy for that to be the case. But yeah, no, it's been really good to chat. So go and follow Lorraine at Sustainable Smallholding on Facebook. Do not follow her on Twitter. Apparently that's a dangerous game. I hope you've all enjoyed listening to. No, not tomorrow. Next week we're heading, as I said at the start, back to the Isle of Arran. Number 62 is the first R2Kast that we're doing with someone from Arran. It is my dad. What better place to start? So yeah, you can come and hear Old Coley, who you'll have seen on R2K's story next week. But yeah, Lorraine, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and we shall see you all next week.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Right, before we finish, can you tell me what that means?
Thank you very much, and good evening.
Perfect. Well, merci beaucoup, and good evening. See you all later.
Well, that's it. Another R2Kast finished. Another agricultural mind opened up. And I would just like to say that getting these guests on board does take time, and it always has done. But I've now went weekly, and with that comes even more time required. And I would just like to finally thank once more the Scottish Farmer for sponsoring the show and making that much more possible. Please be sure to get in touch if you've any ideas of people you'd like to see on the podcast, or maybe ideas you have for me presenting better, because I definitely do require that. See you in the next one.